Hello there, and welcome to another episode of the Savvy Painter Podcast. I'm your host, Antrice Wood, and if you are new here, welcome. So glad you found me. And if you've been listening for a while, welcome back. I'm super happy to have you here. In this episode, we are diving into perfectionism. This is part 4 in a 4-part series from a live event. These topics have been coming up a lot in my conversations with artists. So I wanted to share these events with all of you. And if you haven't picked up on the pattern yet, there is a worksheet for perfectionism as well. You are welcome to pick that up in the show notes. As always, it is designed to help you just gain an understanding of where this shows up in your life and give you a little bit of awareness around it, because that's the only way that you're going to be able to shift it. Okay, here we go. So, friends, we're going to talk about perfectionism today, all the different many ways it shows up in our studio and throughout our practice. There are really obvious ways that perfectionism shows up. You know, a lot of times I think we have the idea that perfectionism shows up in our artwork in the sense that we've got to get like everything rendered perfectly. And I think sometimes the idea might be it's either got to be almost like, I don't think we are consciously saying this to ourselves, but I think like there's this idea like that it has to be like a photograph in a way, even though we know we don't want our work to be like a photograph, or it's got to be like Rembrandt, or, you know, like there's some idea that we have in our head that is what perfection is. And the only thing that we really know about our individual ideas about perfection is that whatever we're doing is not it. Like we typically do not have an idea about it in the sense of like, oh, I can tell you when I have reached perfection. And we don't have that definition, I think, because intellectually we know that we can't be perfect. And so there's a little bit of a disconnect there. And yet our behaviors demonstrate that somewhere in the back of our mind, we think that there is a standard that we're supposed to reach, and that's perfectionism. We're sure we're not a master artist, and yet it's kind of a little bit like perfectionism. Like we're not really clear on what a master is, and we need other people to tell us if we are or not, for the most part, right? So there's a connection in this, I think, for artists. And I love like Brené Brown's definition of perfectionism is that perfectionism is something that's external to you. And I have a lot of thoughts about like what exactly is perfectionism and how does it show up for us artists in our studios. And I think like a really good comparison is perfectionism and mastery. So perfectionism is looking outside of yourself for validation, looking outside of yourself for acceptance, looking outside of yourself for self-worth. Like if you think of all of the, like our concepts of perfection, it's really hard to kind of nail it down what exactly it is, because it's kind of like defining who they are. It's a shapeshifter. It's always moving. It's always like just a little bit out of our reach. And if we take that as the definition of perfectionism, that perfectionism is looking outside of ourselves for our own validation, looking outside of ourselves for acceptance, and looking outside of ourselves for like, am I okay? Mastery is looking inside for validation, looking inside for acceptance and self-worth. Perfectionism will have you people-pleasing. Perfectionism will have you like wanting to make sure that everybody else thinks that you're okay, while mastery is holding your inner wisdom in very high regard. Perfectionism will have you doing things like overworking a painting. Mastery is trusting yourself and making the marks on your canvas with conviction, right? So remember yesterday we were talking about overworking, or yesterday, the day before, we were talking about that on Tuesday. One of the main reasons we overwork a painting is because we don't trust ourselves and there's so much indecision in what we're doing. Perfectionism will have us making things very, very complicated because whether it's painting or whether it is our art practice in general, the business of our art, it will get very, very complicated because it's not good enough as it is. So I better do more, I better add more, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas mastery is allowing yourself to make it easy and simple and trusting that you know what's best for you. Perfectionism invites indecision, an inability to commit to a decision. Whereas mastery is knowing that any decision you make is the right decision because you will make it the right decision because you always have your own back. Perfectionism results in having dozens and dozens of unfinished paintings because you won't allow yourself to be done because you're always thinking there's something wrong or that it could be better. You're thinking it could be better from a place of not wanting somebody else to find fault in it or not allowing it to be criticized or not allowing something to be wrong with it. Whereas in mastery, thinking it could be better comes from a healthy ambition of wanting to see what is possible for you with your art. So it's coming more from a place of curiosity and openness than from, I'm not good enough, or there might be something wrong with it. Just hang on, I'll find it. There's definitely something wrong with this, right? Perfectionism is bouncing around between genres and subject matters from like this place of graspiness, like a sense of FOMO, that fear of missing out. It's bouncing between genres and subject matters because you're chasing what you think somebody else might like, or because you think what you're currently doing isn't good enough. Whereas in mastery, playing and exploring with different genres and subject matters comes from curiosity, like genuine curiosity, genuine intuition, awe, wonder. Like, I'm so curious about like, how do I do that? I really want to be able to, I want to surprise myself and just look at like, what is it that I'm capable of doing? Perfectionism has us taking really frantic action. It's trying to be everything and everywhere all at the same time because you got to get it all, right? Or it's either that frantic action or it's no action, like the deer in the headlights, because there's that thought of no matter what I do, it's not going to be enough. And the indecision comes in, right? Mastery is calm and confident and certain. And mastery takes breaks from a place of self-care and of like, yes, I want to rest my mind and rest my body so that I can continue to paint. It's taking a break from self-care as opposed to fear and indecision. Perfection has us thinking things like I need this exact color. There's a tube out there that has this perfect color, and that's why I can't finish my painting. Or there's a brush out there, and that's the reason, or a light bulb. So perfectionism has us thinking that we need these exact, precise tools that other artists know about that we don't know about before we can create something. Whereas mastery doesn't blame the materials. Mastery is just like, what have I got? Because I have an idea and I'm going to make this happen. That's that certainty and conviction. Perfectionism has us taking course after course after course without digesting any of it or taking the time to put into practice what we've learned. And before one course is even done, you're already signing up for the next one. That action is coming from a feeling of lack. It's that frantic action taking. It's like it comes from anxiousness. as opposed to mastery. It's a strategic and thoughtful decision about what specific skill gap you're trying to close, because you know what you want. You know what that skill is that you're trying to get for your artwork. And perfectionism is also very unforgiving. There is no room for error with perfectionism. It always reminds me, like, this piece of perfectionism always reminds me of, like, I'm sure you all have heard this analogy of a baby learning how to walk, and how we would encourage a baby learning how to walk. We wouldn't talk to a baby learning to do something, learning to walk for the first time, the way that we often talk to ourselves when we are learning something. But here's the thing. That all applies. Yes, of course. But the thing that we've forgotten is that all of the falls and all of the getting back up again were essential to the baby learning how to walk. That is how every single one of you built the muscles that you now use to walk with such confidence. The muscles were not developed enough to stand. That's why the baby falls over. And every time the baby falls over and gets back up, it's building that muscle. It's the standing and falling and getting back up that builds all the muscles in our bodies that allow us to walk for the first time. And then we walk and it's super wobbly and we build more muscles and then we run. And it's wobbly and unstable because the muscles that we needed as babies to balance weren't fully developed yet. They were created every single time we fell down and got back up, every time we used the table to figure out how to balance. Mastery is very forgiving. Mastery knows that love is always the answer. Always. Mastery is never aggressive. It's never arrogant. It's never unkind to yourself. You can be masterful without being cruel to yourself, because with mastery, you have your own back always. With perfectionism, we want other people to reassure ourselves. Mastery knows, I belong here. This is my place. Perfectionism wants other people to validate. Mastery knows, I'm worthy of calling myself an artist. And I don't expect myself to be perfect. Perfectionism wants us to hide, because to perfectionism, rejection is death. Mastery is being willing to experience any emotion. We talked about this on Tuesday, right? Willing to experience any emotion, because you know that feelings are just a vibration in your body. And those vibrations are not worth sacrificing all of the wondrous possibilities that you have inside of you waiting to come out. So Mia's asking if I can repeat the part about the vibrations. Yes, absolutely. So just out of curiosity, tell me, like, what are you feeling right now? You can access it.
Okay. Right now I'm fine. But when you brought up perfectionism and you talked about it, I wrote down frantic, panicky, needy.
Mm-hmm.
And also taking class after class, sometimes not taking it in and using it and feeling like I'm still scrambling like a cat, like, wait.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, I didn't get it.
Yeah.
Kind of feeling.
So, like, let's go with that feeling. Like, so just like, we're just going to explore like that feeling for a second. So that feeling of frantic and that kind of like feeling like the cat doing this, like, what does that feel like in your body? The physical sensation?
Like here, it gets here.
Like in your chest, you can feel it there in your chest. And what is it? Is it hard or is it soft, or like, describe it to me as if, like, I have never Data from Star Trek. I've never experienced an emotion in my life. What is this in your chest that's happening? I don't understand.
It's unsteady.
Okay.
It does have a vibration. It has an energy that is dark.
Dark, like it's black? Like
It's and it almost has a smell, like it stinks. Like get out, like I don't know. It's just
yeah.
and it's heavy.
Okay. So I'm Data. I've never experienced this before. I have no emotion. So what I'm hearing is like it's stinky and there's like a pressure to it and there's like a bit of a vibration. Okay.
Yeah.
So I've never experienced that before. So then my question would be like, what is that? Like, how bad is this that you do so much to try to avoid it? Like, is it like, are you going to die from that? Like that pressure and that vibration and that stinky smell?
Well, when you're experiencing it, the panic can be so overwhelming.
Yeah.
You will want it to go away. So,
yeah. So it's really uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And it's not fun. For sure. It doesn't sound fun.
No.
Right. Right. And what do you think causes that like anxiety, that panic? Like, so if you're just feeling that emotion, like just how it feels in the body, right? That vibration, all of that.
Yeah.
What typically happens is, so the actual physical sensation that you're feeling when you're having that, when you're feeling that franticness, as you just, and we all probably feel it a little bit different. It's a little bit pressure and it's like a pressure and it's uncomfortable and there's a vibration and there's an energy, right?
Yeah.
And then our brain tells us all these stories about it. Our brain is like, oh my God, this is really bad. And so the brain starts feeding itself and we get into this cycle of like, oh, this anticipation of something really bad is going to happen. But the actual physical sensation when you're feeling that frantic at that moment, if you just allow yourself to feel it, is just that pressure in your chest and that vibration in your body and that energy, right? Mm-hmm. And that's the thing, that's the thing that we are often so afraid of, that we're unwilling to feel it. And so we'll do so many things to avoid that. Like, I don't want to feel like whatever the feeling for disappointment is, or whatever the physical sensation that happens in our body when we feel disappointed, or we feel rejected, or we feel frustrated because things aren't going well, or we feel impatient. That's another one. Like, I feel impatient. I'm super impatient, all of you. I'm a very impatient person. So like that feeling in my body, like whatever that vibration is, like when we think of feelings as like really allowing ourselves to feel it and recognize like what is actually happening in my body, not what my brain is telling me. Because our brain is going to tell us that the world is ending. Our brain is going to tell us like, oh, that you're going to die. You are totally going to die right now. If they reject you, it'll be so embarrassing. It'll be so humiliating. And then your brain's just going to start adding and adding and adding. And then your body responds to that. Your body's like, wait a minute, we're going to die. Better get all the adrenaline needs to come. Like, we better get ready, fight, flight, or freeze. Something's going to happen. This is life threatening, right?
Yeah.
So that's the emotion that we're talking about. Like,
it's exactly those three things.
Yeah. So our brain invents all these stories about it. Our brain is just like, oh my God, here it comes. It's going to be bad. It's really, really bad. This is awful. Like, wait, but our actual physical sensation that we're experiencing, just a vibration. It's amazing. Like when you think about it that way. And so what we talked about is this idea that all the reasons that we don't do what we want to do is because we take action because we want to feel something or we don't want to feel something. We act or we don't act in response to that. So if your brain's telling you that this is going to be horrible and this is going to be awful and this is like you're going to die, then of course you're not going to want to do it. Of course you're not going to want to answer that email. Of course you're not going to want to submit your work into the gallery. Of course you're not going to want to finish your painting if it's not going to be right and somebody's going to criticize it. right? Those are all the thoughts that are like hanging out in the back of our head that oftentimes we just accept them as truth. And we just totally believe any thought that comes into our head. We just believe it. We're like, yep, my brain said so. Of course, that's true. So this is where this awareness comes in, and like our ideas about perfection and being willing to feel any emotion in service of our art. Am I, for example, would I be willing, for example, to feel embarrassed if I posted something on the internet and 100 people said it was terrible? My brain, if I'm not conscious of it, my brain's going to be like, oh my God, if you post something on the internet and 100 people tell you it's terrible, like that's the worst painting I've ever seen. Can you imagine like how humiliated you will feel? Can you imagine like just the sheer embarrassment of that? This is what my brain's going to tell me. You're going to die. That's going to be terrible. That's going to be awful. You know what's better? Don't post it. Don't put yourself through that, because that is death. That's what our brain starts to tell us, unless we're willing to examine the thought, take a minute to like really put it into perspective, and then say like, okay, what is actually happening here? That makes sense? I'll give you a super long, like really detailed explanation. We have these tendencies. So when our brain tells us that we're going to die, then it responds. It's like, okay, we're going to die, so we better do something. So we're either going to fight, we're going to run away, we're going to freeze, or there's also fawning. So it's fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And that shows up in all these different ways with our art. So let's take a look at this. Like, what are some of the ways that you might know? How about this? Give me one way that you might know that you are kind of leaning towards that perfectionist tendency in your work. Dee Dee's saying not finishing the paintings, overpainting, not sharing, overworking. Don't look at it yet. It's not finished. Yeah. Yeah, that's another one. That is a really good one, is telling, if you think about social media or showing your work, giving all the caveats. Here's the painting, but here's everything wrong with it. So I'm going to tell you everything's wrong with it before you can, because I want to make sure you know that I know. Your brain doesn't want anyone else to criticize you, so it's going to do it first. So when you have that signal, like once you start to build the awareness for when perfectionism is showing up and you start to gain that awareness, you can often feel it in your body. And that's another signal first. Like, even if you can't recognize, like, what am I thinking about that's causing this? What am I worrying about? Typically it's something like, what will people think? That is the best one. Or is this good enough? It's some form of that. And if you can feel that tension in your body and get curious, like, oh, I know, for example, Mia, when you were saying that feeling you get in your chest, like, so for all of us, we'll have that experience slightly differently. And so when you sense that vibration, that energy in your chest, you'll start to recognize like, oh, that's different from being excited, because when I feel excited, I get this tingling in my fingers or something like that, right? So you start to get this awareness, and then you start to realize like, oh, I'm feeling that particular sensation in my body. What am I thinking about right now that's causing me to feel frantic and anxious? What's going on in my mind right now? And with awareness, you have choice. That's all it is. It's not that you have to be aware of every single, like, it's impossible for you to be aware of every single thought that goes through your head. We think so fast. Our brains work so quickly. It's impossible to be aware of everything. So that's when it's really helpful to start to notice like, oh, I'm feeling that sensation. Like, that's the tendency for perfectionism. What am I thinking about right now? What do I want to think about my work instead? How can I practice mastery with myself? So who wants coaching? Pat.
So For me, my go-to is too many brush strokes.
Okay.
When I'm feeling the perfectionism versus the mastering.
Okay. Why do you think you're doing too many brush strokes? So what do you think is what's going on in your head?
I'm quite certain it's just that it's a lack of confidence, basically. Because when I put this first part down, because I mean, I can justify it by saying, well, I'm layering in the color, which you need to do. But reality is, the brush is getting smaller, or it's just, I'm overlayering because this is not good. I got to make it better. This is awful.
Yeah. So how do you know that it's awful?
That's the thing is I don't, but I do know that what I'm trying to do is when I can recognize that feeling, that's break time. That's time to set that painting down either for the day, for an hour, or for lunch, and shift gear to something else. Because then I usually get a reset.
So how do you know that this isn't, the thought is like, there's a lot of like actions that you're taking. So it's always really interesting to just like kind of like start to build that awareness. So you mentioned, for example, like the brushes get smaller. So why do you think you would switch the brush and grab a smaller one? Like what's the idea there?
I start to associate a nice clean line with perfectionism, with being perfect rather. And so if it's looking too messy, then I'm thinking that maybe in my mind, it's like, oh, this is the work of an amateur because it's messy.
So then like, and so this is like, so all of us like notice like how like the judgment that we all like, how many people do this or something similar? Like, I know I do. Right. Yeah. So we start like thinking like, oh, this isn't working. Let me do something different. And at that moment, your thought is that the material is like that the brush is what's causing it.
What actually, I was just thinking that isn't actually necessarily, I don't, sometimes I switch brushes. That's not the more common thing.
Okay.
But it's actually is I will try to make the cleaner line with the same brush, so I don't necessarily change it, but it's so that here's the process. I start painting, and then if the doubt starts creeping in, then okay, so this doesn't look good. So I'm going to fix it. I just need to add more detail. And then I have so much detail. And then it's like, so I'm an oil painter. So then now the colors are starting to work towards mud. And then it's like, okay, so I need to clean this up and,
Do you recognize a pattern in is detail? How does adding detail clean things up for you?
That's a very good question. I never even thought of it actually until I'm telling you right now.
Yeah.
I don't even know.
Yeah. So that's like right there, Pat, that's an amazing awareness.
Yeah.
That's very, very powerful because if you realize like, oh, I see when I'm uncertain about when I'm uncertain about my paintings, I go to more detail.
Yeah.
And that can be your like a little signal for you to just pause for a second and step back from your painting.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. That's a really great thought.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So for all of you, like, I want to loop back because I think that what Pat brought up is really important, right? So there's the impulse that she had is I'm going to add more detail. And what's very important to note is like what's happening is she's adding more detail in an effort to change something different. It's coming from a place of this isn't working and this isn't good enough. So the thought is this isn't working, or this is messy. I think is the words that you said, right, Pat? You said this was messy.
Yes.
Yeah. So the thought is this is messy. And when you're like, if you're thinking like, oh, my painting's a mess, or this is messy, what is the feeling that you would have if you were looking at your painting and you're thinking, oh, this is messy?
Rookie, a newbie, just, not a master.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. You were saying like you were feeling like an amateur earlier. Yeah. Okay. So she sees the painting as she looks at the painting and she thinks this is messy. And then her feeling is this is like, I'm an amateur. It's like feeling amateurish. So then you start to add more detail.
Yeah.
Okay. And what happens then is then your painting is what you get from that is a painting that's overworked. So I want to loop back for everybody, because on Tuesday we talked about trusting your intuition. Okay. So how does this fit when you look at your painting and you think it's messy and I feel like an amateur? And so your impulse, like from that, is add more detail, but you're not getting the result that you want. So how does that connect? Right. So just notice, like, if you're like the thought pattern of I'm an amateur it's very judgmental. It's kind of judgmental, right? Doesn't feel too great. So your higher self is not going to offer you that. Your higher self is not going to cut you down. So your higher self is going to look at the painting and go like, oh, the vision in my head is this, and what I'm seeing is different. What exactly is different? And what do I need to do to close that gap without cutting you down? And so then your intuition, like your true higher self intuition, is going to offer you a move that will bring you closer to the vision that's in your head. And the way that you know the difference is that feeling like that I was talking about with Mia, that feeling of like, I'm an amateur, like that feeling, that closing down feeling, right? To put emotions, because sometimes we don't always have like strong words for our emotions. It's like, if we're not used to doing this work, sometimes it's really hard to be like, is it like anxiety or is it nervous? Like which, like on what, like what is the fine little thing, right? So really, like the quickest way to it, when you're just, for all of you now who are just starting out with this and maybe aren't used to like finding the words, it's just, is it opening or closing? When I think this is messy and like there's another thought in there, like, like underneath that, there's a sort of, I'm not good enough. Right. Yeah. That's closing versus your higher self is going to be offering like, oh, you know what? Like, okay, I know what we want to do here. And so I see I'm seeing the image in its entirety. I'm not like getting tunnel vision. My brain is open and I'm seeing the whole thing. Here's our next move. Okay. So feel for that, right? So Mia, what I was saying to you is that like when you start to sense that those vibrations in your body, and we kind of know like A, it's only a vibration, but B, you start to distinguish open or close. And for all of you too, like one thing I think is really important to know, I just want to make sure nobody ever uses these ideas or these concepts against yourself. My growth studio friends, like cardinal rule number 1 in growth studios, you never, ever, ever beat yourself up. You never use this against yourself, right? So just so you know, most people can only identify like 3 main emotions. The majority of people are not very in tune with their emotions. It's just not something that we ever learned, right? So most people can identify happy, sad, and pissed off. Those are our go-tos. Like those we just know immediately, right? So for this purpose, for the purposes, like you just really need to know two emotions or two feelings really is like, do I feel open or do I feel closed? Like that will get you in the ballpark and you'll be able to do a lot with that. Christina, I love that. It makes me feel more in control. Yeah. Which is kind of funny because we're not actually that much in control of our work. We think we are, but we're not totally in control. And that's what makes it kind of interesting and fun is those happy accidents. Like that sense of perfection is oftentimes like a feeling of I want to be in control. I want to know the outcome. I want to know ahead of time. I want the crystal ball. I want to know that everything's okay. So much of this comes from, our primitive, like this need for perfectionism or that sort of quest is very hardwired into us because we needed it to survive. Like belonging is hardwired into us because we needed everybody else in our group in order to find food, get shelter, all of those things. We don't need that as much, but we still need people for our emotional needs. And a lot of this, like we picked up so much of these perfectionistic tendencies as children, whether purposely or not. Some of us learned things like achievement gets me attention and love. Being a good girl gets me attention and love from my family. Like being the strong little man in the house, that gives me attention and love, right? So we learned all these things like this is how I survive. And so we pick all that up and we bring it with us into our art. And we pick it up and we bring it with us everywhere else. So like a lot of times we're, like it's really important to look good and to dress nice and to be like, and to be polite and to like have all these like social tendencies that we were taught. And the way that shows up in our art is, like sometimes the wires get crossed or, and we think that we have to do the perfect thing, say the perfect thing, or we're never going to get into a gallery. Like one word that's out of order, one grammatical error, and we're done, right? That's what our brain tells us. And if that's what our brain is telling us, then no wonder, like it makes so much sense that talking about your work is really hard. That writing your bio brings up anxiety. Because if these ideas are unchecked, running loose in our head, I like to talk about like they're little squirrels running around. If they're running loose in our head and we're not aware of it, somebody can ask you like, hey, I love your work. Tell me more about it. And your brain's like, no, you're going to die. Don't get it right. You better get it right. You better get it exactly right in the right order with the right inflection. All of it has to be perfect or you're going to die. So somebody asks you about your work and you're like, I just like to paint. I'm just going to keep it simple and not say anything. And I'm going to be very quiet now and hope that I don't get hurt. Right? That's what we do. So it all of it makes absolute sense. And now you just start to look for the awareness. Now you just start looking for the openings. All you're looking for, just like with Pat, is just that little crack, just that little tiny, like, can you get your finger in there and make a little bit of space for you to open up and just start trying like one new thing. Like sometimes you can just see it and you're like, oh, I'm not doing that anymore. Done. But sometimes you need a little help with that. Or sometimes you need like a little bit of like, dipping your toe in the water, right? Make sure that you're absolutely safe as you're doing this. Like your brain might need that from you. And so your job as a master artist is to do that with love, to protect the artist by always responding with love, which is something that we haven't been taught to do for ourselves. We are usually taught to do that for other people. But if we do it for ourselves, then that's selfish, that's arrogant, and all the other things. Rejection for me is difficult to accept. Yeah. Madalonga, would you like to come on? Where are you? There you are. Hi.
Yes, my English is not so good, but
That's okay.
yes, rejection, I think, is the biggest problem for me when we are talking about perfectionism. I think for me is that feeling of I think being a part of the group, exclusion. I think you speak that before when you the primary needs that the child the protected in the family and not be rejected. I think that it's a similar feeling, very primary, but yes, I think it's
Yeah. And so this is where we have that opportunity again to just like, can I just like carve out just a little bit of space there for myself to open up a different thought that yes. So now, so you can understand, like, of course, if I experience rejection and my belief, the underlying belief is that if I am rejected, I'm going to be pushed out of this group. And being pushed out of this group means I'm alone in this world, or, that sort of primal fear is I'm away from my people. I have no protection. I have no support. Then any form of rejection will bring up those primal sensations of like, this is terrifying. This is serious. This could be death. So knowing where it comes from, like knowing that, yeah, of course I'm going to feel that way. Of course, rejection is hard. What do you think is available to you? Like, how would you want to, what do you feel like is just knowing that is available to you in terms of like, oh, how else could I think of my artwork being rejected?
I can think the positive side and may not be rejected, or the worst, as you are saying, what the worst thing that I will feel is some stomach ache or depression or thing like that. I will not die. Well, okay, but that is when I rationalize things. But when I don't rationalize, I it's more it's a reflection of automatic.
Yeah, of course. And that makes, and yes, and that's, I'm so glad you brought that up because this is so helpful for everybody. We have all these we have these automatic responses to things. Like, so when we're not paying attention, it's exactly right. When you're not paying attention or when you're just not aware of it, we have like automatic responses, and those automatic responses come from, like all the times we've ever practiced that response, or we've done it before. And so it's literally like kind of hardwired into our brain. There's a stimulus and there's a response. And it's just when this happens, this is the reaction, right? Our brain loves shortcuts too, because we need them. Right? So our brain is always going to try to find shortcuts. So it's like, oh, that happens, then the response is this, right? Because if we had to sit there and think through every single possible reaction, every time there was a stimulus, we would be dead. Right? So you have that automatic reaction. And what will happen is as you develop this awareness, every now and again, you'll be like, oh, wait, I see what I'm doing. I don't need to respond that way. I can recognize if I'm rejected intellectually, I understand I'm not going to die. So this time I'm going to choose this other way. When you do that, you open up a new pathway. And you won't do it every single time, but every time you do, you're going to make that pathway stronger. And the first time you do it, it will be difficult to remember to do that. It will feel like weird because you're not used to it. It'll feel a little bit uncomfortable because you're not used to it. And then you do it and you have this tiny little thread, and then you do it again and it gets a little thicker, and you do it again and do it again and do it again. And every time you do it, that thread gets a little bit thicker, and it gets a little bit easier to take that response. And then pretty soon that becomes the default. But in the meantime, there's some practice to do, right? Just like how you learned how to draw, just like how you learned how to paint. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. So with the rejection, so there's two things I want to offer all of you with that is what I just offered you, but then like when it's happening, right? So when it's happening, if it's in that place where you do feel that high level of stimulus and you do really feel like that, like Mia was kind of describing almost like a panic attack, then you just want to sit with it and just be like, yeah, okay, this is rejection. This is that vibration is happening in my body. My brain is making it mean terrible things. And I'm just going to give myself some space, allow myself to be with it, just feel those vibrations, not resist it. And I'm going to respond to myself with love. Instead of, why are you feeling this way? It's just a painting. What is wrong with you? It's just a gallery. Love is the answer. That's the thought I'm going to give you. Like when you're feeling rejected or when you experience rejection, when you get a letter or an email that says no, I want to invite you to just ask the question, how can I respond with love for myself? What's the most loving way that I can respond to this for me? The rejection letter for everybody, because we're all going to experience rejection. That's what we have signed up for. We don't get out of this without rejection. At some point, if you are continually putting yourself out there, if you're really like putting yourself out and pushing yourself and doing the work that you're here to do, you will be rejected. It's normal. It's natural. It's what happens. And you get to choose, what will I make this mean? What will I make this mean for myself if I'm rejected? Am I requiring myself to be the unicorn artist in the world who never gets rejected? And so now that I have, something's gone horribly wrong. That's perfectionism. I shouldn't have to feel rejected. I shouldn't be rejected. If I were any good, I wouldn't be rejected. If I'd just gotten that smaller brush out and made that one line a little bit cleaner, I would not have been rejected. That's what your brain tries to tell you. That's perfectionism talking to you. Mastery is a whole different thing. Mastery is going to open you up. Mastery is going to say, yeah, that sucks. I really wanted to be in that show and I didn't get in. And I'm willing to experience this rejection in service of my art. And I'm going to allow it and I'm going to feel it. And I'm going to give myself the time to mourn the fact that I didn't get what I wanted. And then I'm going to get right back up and go again. I know my brain wants to tell me that I'm going to die, but I know I won't. And I'm willing to feel whatever that uncomfortable feeling is, because what's on the other side of that uncomfortable feeling is everything that I want. And I'll offer you one last thing, which is this consideration as we think about what we do, how perfectionism really is a misguided attempt to protect us from feeling something we don't want to feel. But the cost of perfectionism, the cost of that is we don't see what is possible for us. We hide. We don't talk about our art. We don't finish the painting. So there is a very high price tag that comes with perfectionism. And guess what? That is also very uncomfortable. So you can feel really uncomfortable because you didn't achieve your dreams, because you didn't go after it, because you didn't want to feel rejection, because you didn't want to feel disappointed, or you can be really uncomfortable for a few minutes while you experience that vibration in your body as you're reading the rejection letter and you go after your dreams anyway. That's what I have for all of you tonight. This is what we do every single week in Growth Studio. I want to invite all of you to join. I would love to have you in. If it's not the right time for you, that's okay too. I hope you take everything that you can out of this week and you use it and you apply it and you go out there and you get after what is yours, which is your mastery. It is your art. This is what you are here for. And like I said, when I started this whole thing, my passion is to help other artists create their work, because I truly, truly believe that we are the healers in this world. We are the people that make this world. We are part of, we aren't the only people. I won't say that. We are a huge part of what makes this world a better place, because we remind people what it's like to be human. We remind people what it's like to see beauty in this world. All right, friends. Ciao, ciao. And one last thing, if you are ready to join Growth Studio, you're thinking about it, you're curious about it, just head on over to savvypainter.com/join. You know, every week we meet up live for coaching and critiques. You will be joining a fabulous group of artists, and we would love to see you there. So if you've been thinking about it, come on in. It's so much fun. Again, the link is savvypainter.com/join. Hey, if you want to take what you are learning here on the Savvy Painter podcast even further, join us in Growth Studio. This is where you will take what you've learned here on the podcast and apply it, practice it, and take these concepts from just good ideas that maybe you'll do someday to habits that become part of your practice. Growth Studio is a unique community of artists. We meet multiple times a week for live coaching, critiques, and demos. Just go to savvypainter.com/join.